Hi, and welcome to this live broadcast. Today, I'm really excited to do a palette tour, watercolor palette tour today. So as watercolor beginners, I think choosing the right paints and colors and things can be sometimes overwhelming, but there's so many options out there and a lot of us try a lot of different things. And so I thought it would be helpful today to just kind of give a tour of the different watercolor palettes that I have as far as paints, and let you know what I like, don't like about each of them, and let you decide for yourself. So with that, let's just jump right in. So as you can see here, I have quite a few paints here, and I would just want to first say that you do not need all these paints. I have probably collected more than enough for a lifetime. I think it would take me quite a while to use all these, but as a beginner, I wasn't sure what paints I would like, what was going to work best for my art, so I tried a lot of different things. So I'll just start right from the beginning. The first thing that I bought when I started researching watercolor paints, I heard a lot about Winsor and Newton. A lot of artists that I followed use these paints, and so they do have a Cotman student grade brand, and then they also have the professional series brand. I went ahead and bought this 45 pan set of the Winsor Newton Cotman colors, and I do have more than 45 pans here. Over time I've added new tubes of different paints, but what's great about these is I, again, wasn't sure what colors I wanted to use. I didn't want to, start with a paint that was, going to be really poor quality, and I heard really good things about Winsor and Newton, and honestly, this is still my go-to palette. I use it all the time. The student grade versus professional grade, I don't notice a ton of difference. I think the biggest thing is that the student grade paints aren't as pigmented as the professional series, so they'll go on a little bit lighter. You might have to do a little bit of layering, but this has been a very my go-to palette. It's been very handy. And if you want to see all the colors that I have here, you can see a lot of them came in this 45 pan set. I've added a few like neutral tint. I was kind of exploring with lots of different pinks and purples, so I've added some opera rose, some quinacridone red and rose madder, ultramarine violet. I also like this color Terra Verte. It's a really light kind of granulating color, and I've added olive green. So just trying to try out different colors and stuff, but this gave me the freedom to really explore with color. I think if I were to put together, one day maybe I'll put together a palette of all Winsor Newton professional colors, but this gave me all the experience I needed to kind of pick and choose which ones of those I use the most. And you can tell pretty easily which ones I use the most, because they're the ones that are getting low or don't have as much paint. Now, I will say that what I do when I get low on a color is I've been just I run out of my sap green from my Cotman pan that came with the set, and I went and bought a tube of the professional series sap green. So as I use them up, I fill them, but you can tell there are paints that still look fairly new that I don't use very often, and so that gave me a great idea of what to do with choosing colors of tubes that I might buy. And so the tubes, if you're not familiar with tubes versus pans, they essentially use them the same way unless you want to use it straight out of the tube, but I just poured the tube paints in a half pan and let it dry, and then you use it and activate it the same way you do with watercolor pans. So that is my go-to. And then a lot of people were talking about Daniel Smith, and I knew that Daniel Smith was another professional grade paint. Again, if I was going to invest, I didn't really know what. So I think I got this on a sale on Amazon, the Daniel Smith kind of primary set, and included not all these colors. I've added some, but it was a limited set of colors, and then they gave you an extra little pan to put additionals in. So what I learned about using the Daniel Smith is they're a lot creamier, they go on a lot smoother. Definitely you can tell that these are professional grade paints. Also, I heard that they were like kind of famous for being granulating, and so granulating means that when you put down color, it will kind of granulate or separate a little bit, and a lot of times the granulating paints will separate into more than one pigment. So that was something I was interested in trying out. So I bought a few of their granulating paints. I got a dot card and kind of tested some of out before I decided, but you can see I've added a few other colors in here. Unfortunately, I don't have these ones labeled. You can see I did swatch cards here, and then I also, there's a brand called Schmink that is another really high quality watercolor brand. Not willing to really like invest in that yet, but they had some really great granulating colors. So there was a woman on Facebook that was filling and selling pans pretty inexpensively. So I bought some more of these granulating colors from Schmick. So this is essentially kind of like my granulating set. And these granulating colors, they're really interesting because they go on, and if you're looking for a nice smooth wash and you don't want to see a lot of the texture of the paper or a lot of variation, I would say to probably stay away from these. But when you're looking for that effect, granulating colors are really helpful for that. Now you can see on some of these, let me switch the camera here. You can see on some of these that you can clearly see, especially with this blue-green here, that it's separated into more than one pigment. Same with this purple pink here. And I think also this neutral tint I got was really helpful for shadows. But one of the colors I was most excited about with Daniel Smith was the Moon Glow. And I do have, if I can find it here, yes. I wanted to do kind of a study with values, and so I painted this with the Daniel Smith Moon Glow, and it's just one color, and obviously I've darkened it up and lightened it up in different areas, but you can see if you're looking for a nice even wash, that's not what you're expecting with these granulating colors. And if that's something you like, definitely go for the Daniel Smith. If not, then maybe try something more like the Winsor Newton. And just so you can see kind of where these swatches are, you can see how the colors separate. And this has been a really fun set. I honestly don't use it as often, just because I'm so used to my Winsor Newton set. I also have a few more of the Schmicks that, again, I kind of bought off of a woman on Facebook. So again, you can see how those granulate that bottom row there. And this is a little Winsor Newton travel palette that I bought, and I actually have already just reused the palette for some other brand paints. So I put my extra Schmicks in here. There's also a brand called Core. I don't have too many of their paints, just this one set, but they had a set that was like these really, really vibrant colors. And vibrant colors tend to be not so light fast, and so I think sometimes we stray away from them. But Core is really well known for like really great quality bright colors, and so I just bought one set of those and added to my tube. Again, these aren't the ones I use very often. I kind of again was testing out different things, trying to find what I liked, and I ended up kind of sticking with a few different palettes. So if you want to give things a try, maybe check out some of the Facebook groups, grab a dot card. Dot cards, basically, you'll get a piece of paper with a dot of dried paint and all the different colors, and then you can test them out and not have to invest in all these different paints. Again, I don't have these labeled, but here's just all the Schmick ones that I acquired, and you can kind of see the granulating properties there. All right, so that was kind of where I started. Had just a few palettes, and you know, I think sometimes as artists we spend time learning how to paint or painting, and other times we spend time buying art supplies. So that's kind of what I did there. But then I took an art class, and when I took the art class, I knew I had a lot of colors here in my Winsor Newton palette, and I wanted to be a little bit more, have more of a limited palette so I could challenge myself during that class. And so I bought this little Sennelier palette, and this is their student grade. This is, I know Sennelier makes some higher quality paints, but I just wanted something simple that had, you know, basic colors so I could really challenge myself. And what I learned about these is the Sennelier are honey based. You can almost see they're kind of shiny in the pan, and so they almost look wet, but they're not. They're dry, but it's because they're honey based. And with the honey as the binder, I noticed these are they go on really, really smooth. They can be a little bit more opaque with your washes, but I did try these with salt, and that didn't work out so well. The salt just kind of stuck to the paper, which makes sense. The honey is, you know, sticky, but all in all, this was a great set of paints. When I was taking that watercolor course, let's see if I can find some things that I painted with this. In this class, this was kind of like learning from another artist, so I used this set of paints for this, and you can see I was able to get some of that really great watercolor texture. They also challenged us to paint a portrait, and so here's an example of my very first portrait I ever painted, and I think that these turned out really well. Again, they were student grade, so maybe they're a little bit lighter than or less pigmented than some other paints, but all in all, this was a great set. If I had somebody interested in starting and wanted to like just start simple, I would recommend this Sennelier set for sure. Also, in that course, we started talking a lot about color mixing, and you know, when you're starting out, it's so much easier to learn how to paint when you have a lot of different colors available to you. You can, and I still mix these with each other, but learning how colors react with one another and learning the color wheel and color theory was something that I was a little impatient to do when I first started, so having these colors was great. However, as you become more experienced, you learn about the art of color mixing. And so I eventually purchased this 6-color primary set, and this is the Daniel Smith mixing set. It was really inexpensive. I'll put a link in the description when I share this live video on my YouTube channel. But you can see here, it's basically your 3 primaries, but you've got a warm and a cool version of each primary. If you want to learn a little bit more about color mixing and warm and cool primaries, I do have a video for that on my channel. It's in the Getting Started with Watercolor playlist. I'll try to link it here when I post the video so that you can learn about the difference. But essentially, with these 6 colors, you can really make all the colors that you can imagine, whether you're mixing 2 together or even making a combination of 3 of these. But learning the difference between warm and cool primaries, and the fact that when you mix, you know, a cool blue with a warm red, you're going to get a very different result than if you mix a warm blue with a cool red. So check out that video if you want to learn more. But this, you know, Daniel Smith is a great brand of paint. I purchased their mixing set. It was just 6 tubes, and then I found this empty palette on Amazon and just filled them from there. And this was a great set to learn color mixing. I definitely recommend it, but these 6 colors are honestly all you really need. I was also exploring after I did my first portrait in this watercolor class. You know, I got really excited about the idea of maybe I could paint a portrait. In that class, they really pushed us to just do it and not think about it, just do it. And so I purchased, after learning how difficult it can be to mix the skin tone colors, and sorry, I'm looking for another painting here to show you an example. But although I learned about mixing skin tones, I wanted to also maybe focus more on the painting and less on the color mixing. So I bought this set. It's the complexion set. I'll link this in the description. But this brand, they have a lot of different little palettes like this that have different sets of colors, and, you know, all pastels, or The confection series, like they'll have ones that are kind of themed, but this palette here, you can see all the different swatches. You can get a variety of skin tones with this. It also had a gold in there, which I thought was interesting. But I did use this to kind of teach myself a little bit more about painting portraits. So let's see if I can find, here it is. Here is an example of a painting I did of my daughter playing on the beach, and I used a variety of different paints on this, but for all of the skin tone areas, I definitely used this palette. It made it really simple to just kind of take a couple of colors and mix them together than to like have to worry about mixing it from the primaries. So if you're interested in painting portraits or people and you want to practice more with skin tones, this was a great set. Again, it wasn't very expensive. It's the complexion set. I'll post a link to this as well. And so of course that got me really interested. I had that gold in there, and I had honestly never really thought about adding metallics or golds to my watercolor art. I think at first I was really more interested in trying to learn how to paint realistic images, and I've since learned that that's not always my jam. I kind of like to be more impressionistic or even dabble in some abstract art. So here's an example. I ended up, there's quite a few artists that use this. It's really inexpensive. There's the brand right here. Again, I'll try to put a link in the description. This is just some like really great metallic watercolors. I thought maybe I'll like make some cards and dabble on, but I ended up really liking this for my abstract art. So here's one I did. I do have a video of this as well, but you can see I used the gold to accent here, and I even signed it with the gold, and that really added a really interesting texture and detail to this painting. And then I also used it here. This was just kind of me playing around with the abstract color mixing, but you can see there's a silver sheen to it. I mixed in some of the silver paint from this, and so I know that there's a variety of different brands of metallic paints. Paul Rubens makes a lot of them, but honestly I wasn't quite sure that I would really use them, and so having this kind of limited, more like just golds and silvers was really something that I like to keep on hand, and can add if you're some whimsy to your artwork, or even great for making borders or hand lettering for cards. Again, you don't need all these paints. I'm just letting you know what I have ended up trying and spending my money on, but you definitely don't have to do that. For a Christmas gift, and I mentioned I didn't really like seek out the metallic watercolors, but for a Christmas gift, I ended up getting this set. It doesn't really have a brand name on it. I think it came from Amazon. Again, it was a gift, but these are some really fun, bright colors, and they're all got a little bit of a metallic shimmer to them. And so I haven't used these a ton. I think, again, great for cards, hand lettering. They all have a beautiful shine, and they look to be pretty opaque. And so if you're interested in trying out some like metallic watercolors, this is a pretty inexpensive set. Again, I don't even know if it has a brand name on it. And so if I would say, if you're going to go cheap on something, like just try kind of an inexpensive brand of these. And then if you end up really, really liking painting with these types of metallic paints, maybe try something like the Paul Rubens. Paul Rubens is a Chinese brand of paints, but it's a high quality professional brand. They make papers and paints and all kinds of things. And I don't have too much of their paints. I do use their paper quite a bit. But one thing that I did invest in, again, I was on a kick. I really liked granulating watercolors. And so they had these two sets. Each set just has 6 tubes in it, really large, nice packaging. But these are layering and granulating watercolors. So these were actually pretty inexpensive. I expected to have, for the price, to get like much smaller tubes, but I got really big tubes, so these are going to last forever. Between the two sets, there's 12 colors. Another small gift here for my husband. He had gifted me this tiny little ceramic palette, and there were 12 spots, so I thought this would be perfect to put these in. What's really great about these, they're definitely a different type of watercolor than what we're used to in the US, but these are meant for layering, and they also are known to granulate. So you can see set 1, set 2, I was able to get some really light values as well as some really dark. Like a lot of these I think are mixed with Mars Black, so they will actually layer all the way almost to a black. So if you're doing, I thought these were perfect for monochrome painting, and I've done a couple of those. But again, if you're like kind of that texture and granulation and you're trying to find paints that you can add in some darks into your artwork, these would be a great choice for you. I've not tried their regular paints. I've heard great things about them. But these precipitated colors and granulated layering colors, so far I really like. Let's see if I can find, yes. So one of these colors, this one is called Misty Carmine, and the first thing I painted with these was this monochromatic rose painting. And you can see, again, I was able to get some really dark and really light values, and they blended pretty well, and I really like this set. So I got the first one, ended up buying the second. Actually, I think the second was also a gift for my husband. Amazon makes it so easy to create a list of a wish list. So when I unboxed those, I painted this, kind of thinking I would get the same result. I ended up using 2 different pigments. Kind of wish I had stuck with just one, but as you can see, it's you're not going to get a nice even flat wash with these. I mean, you're going to get a lot more texture and interest into your painting, so kind of pick and choose the paints that work best for what you're trying to paint. Let's see, I think that's all the pan paints that I have. And so if you're a watercolor artist and you've been painting with tubes and pans and maybe you want to explore something a little bit different, there are liquid watercolors. So the way I kind of got interested in liquid watercolors is that I subscribed to Let's Make Art. If you're not familiar with Let's Make Art, they're a fantastic company that is meant, they really focus on teaching watercolor art to people of all skill levels, but they have like a monthly subscription box. They send you everything you need, the paper, the outlines, the project tutorials, and the paints. And they use these liquid watercolors. And this is their own brand, the Dandelion Paint Company. And so these are the first kind of liquid watercolors I ever tried out. If you're interested to learn more about Let's Make Art, I will post a link in the description. But these are liquid. You put them in a palette dish, and then you still would add water to lighten them and things like that. But they're essentially kind of like makes it a lot easier to use the paint straight out of the bottle instead of having to activate it, but really beginner friendly. These are dye based, and so you'll notice on Let's Make Art, let me see if I can find something I've painted with these. Alright, so with Let's Make Art, you know, you're getting more of a budget paper, and then with these paints, they're dye based, so they're not going to spread the same way as like a pigment based paint, but you're also going to get some great textures and movement with these. But I will say, because they're dye based, they don't lift as well. They kind of stain the paper, and they're also not light fast, and so a great beginner paint if you're wanting to test out liquid watercolors, or if you're wanting to check out Let's Make Art and use the same colors as them. These are really inexpensive, fun, and you get a lot of great textures and things with these. So once I started using these liquid watercolors, I wanted to kind of up my game and checked out some other brands. And so I ended up getting a set of the P.H. Martin Hydrus liquid watercolors. So these are, I don't know if you've ever used P.H. Martin Bleed Proof White. I follow Emma Lefebvre, and she always recommended this. And like, if you ever get toward the end of your watercolor and you want to add in some more highlights or light areas, you could definitely use like a white gouache. But P.H. Martin's Bleed Proof White is another great thing to have handy. It activates, I think it's ink, but it actually activates with water, acts a lot like watercolor. And so I was a little bit familiar with P.H. Martin. So I was checking out, they've got, I think, 2 different types of their liquid watercolors. This Hydrus is the more kind of permanent one, and then their other one is more of like a student grade. But these are not just liquid, but they are opaque. So what that means is that with these, you can add water and get all the translucent, beautiful effects of your typical watercolor. However, you can also put them on straight out of the tube and they will be opaque and can layer. So they have a lot of different sets. I think this is a total of all 3 sets. You can see I have a lot of colors that are very similar to one another, so I probably went overboard with the 3 sets. But if you like liquid watercolor or like to do like watercolor pouring or something like that, these are great. I also love that they're opaque. Or can be opaque, because that gives you the ability to add in some more details on top. So typically with watercolor, we paint light to dark, and then once you've kind of put down a dark color, you can't really go back and go over it. But there are a few places in this painting I used the liquid watercolors for this. You can see down in the water, they blended really well. And also areas where I needed them to be opaque, they were very, very opaque. They're also really, really vibrant colors. So these bricks, I remember having to get a really, really, really light wash, almost like painting like with a watery mix. But these are very vibrant, they're light fast. They were a lot of fun to play with. These are the colors that are in this set, and so quite a lot of different colors. But when you add water to these, you can see here the different values I was able to get, and so a lot of, again, variation with these. So I probably have way too much paint. If I had to do this again and start over, I think I still would have gone with the Winsor Newton Cotman set. Again, it's still kind of like my daily go-to set. I'm able to kind of replace the colors as I use them. And then I think the other thing I really like to have is the primary mixing set. And so just because it's important, I think, as you progress in your watercolor journey, to learn about color mixing. So this is definitely something I would buy again, and if once I run out of these paints, I'll probably replace. And I also really love the P.H. Martin Hydrus. So I started using these with even my Let's Make Art tutorials, just because playing with liquid watercolors is really fun, or painting with them, but the fact that they were staining and I wanted them to also be light fast, this was a great investment. And then I think I love having these metallics as well. So you don't have to go out and spend a bunch of money. You don't need as many paints as I have here. Kind of when I went down my granulating watercolor kick, I ended up buying a lot of these paints that I honestly don't use every day. I will say I was able to paint a lot of great things with them. So I do have some paintings here to show you. This one, of course, I just showed you. I painted this with the liquid watercolors. This was a Let's Make Art project, and this was with the Let's Make Art liquid watercolors, the Dandelion Co. I painted this with the Granulating Paul Rubens watercolor. This one as well. I showed you these that I used the metallics on. For this, I used a variety of colors. So I used my palette flesh tones for the skin, and then I ended up using the liquid watercolors for the outfit here. And you can see I was able to get a lot of variety and put in a lot of the details with those liquid watercolors. And then I tried to use some of my Daniel Smith granulating paints in the dirt here. This was the Sennelier. This one too. This one was painted with the Daniel Smith Moon Glow granulating colors. Now I've got a few I haven't showed you yet. I recently painted this. There's a video on my channel if you're getting in the Halloween mood and you want to watch me paint these spooky pumpkins with some spooky music, please check that out. But as I was painting this, I wanted the pumpkins to be really bright and saturated, and as my layers kept drying, it wasn't as saturated as I wanted. So I ended up grabbing my liquid watercolor, the PH Martin, one of these oranges, and that helped me get these really saturated, really bright color orange. And so sometimes with watercolor, it always dries lighter than you put it down. These opaque colors really help make these things stand out. So for this, I ended up using my Winsor Newton Cotman set / professional. I think some of the pinks I was using were from the professional series, but still with lots of layering, I was able to get a lot of great saturation, great paint. This one also painted with the Winsor Newton Cotman, and so you can see I've still got a lot of really bright colors from their palette. Again, the brighter ones aren't as light fast as some of the higher pigmented ones, but great results with each. These are some more from the watercolor class that I took, and I was using that Sennelier palette. But it looks like for this monochrome, we were, again, kind of forced to do a portrait. This is a self-portrait of our teacher. But it looks like I used one of these Schmidt granulating colors. So you can see, even though it's one pigment, it's separated into both blue and purple. So really cool idea. I think the granulating colors are really neat for any type of monochrome artwork. I believe this was also the Sennelier from my art class. And then this was from Let's Make Art. This is one of their tutorials, and I used their paints here. And so you can see with the Let's Make Art paints, you're going to get a lot more of those typical like watercolor hard lines and blooms, and that's actually like a part of this style that I really loved. So I did use those paints so I could get that effect here. They don't blend together as well unless you kind of move things around. So here's an example of what you could get with some of those Let's Make Art dye-based paints. Same thing here. You can see lots of kind of blooms and hard edges, but that's part of the beauty of watercolor. You kind of just let that shine through. Another Let's Make Art project using the dye-based colors. And then these are some more from my watercolor class where I use the Sennelier. And so, again, I quickly noticed that the Sennelier was helping give me great results. Some other beginner paints I've used have just been kind of terrible. So the Sennelier honey-based paints were really great for that beginner watercolor class. Here's another example of some granulating colors. These are from the Daniel Smith palette. I was just kind of mixing and blending, adding a lot of water to see how they would granulate and separate. And you can see like the texture is just amazing. Then these were the honey-based paints. This is where I tried to get the salt, and you can see the salt actually like stuck to the page and never really came off. So it's kind of a neat texture, but wasn't what I was going for. So I think probably with any honey-based paint, you're gonna have kind of an interesting reaction with something like salt. But for the most part, these were really easy to work with, a lot of fun to use, and you can see, really bright and vibrant colors. This is one of my favorite pieces. It's just a pile of rocks, but I ended up using a lot of different color here. And this, I only use those Daniel Smith granulating colors because we're looking at rocks. I wanted to add a lot of texture. That granulating effect really seemed to work well for this type of painting. And so this is an example of the Daniel Smith granulating colors. And then the last example I have here today is just a fun abstract that I did. I like to paint these sometimes when you don't know what to paint or you just want to be creative, and so this was a fun project, and I loved the washes, but once I added the gold from my palette here, I really loved the way this turned out. So lots of different ways to use paints, different effects, different ways to use them, and so I hope that you learned something from this video. And if you have some of these paints, let me know what you think about them in the comments. Or I also have tried a lot of other mediums like watercolor pencils, watercolor markers, some like colored graphite. If you'd like to see some videos on those, let me know in the comments. And also, I teach watercolor here on YouTube, and so I'm really excited about sharing more content with you. So if you hit that subscribe button, you'll be sure to stay tuned for future videos. Also check out my channel if you want to learn more. So thanks for joining me today, and happy painting.